The Remarkable 2. It's a decidedly unremarkable device, which in turn is indeed kind of remarkable. You see, this is a review from a writer's perspective about the Remarkable 2, which is a decidedly writer's implement and the perfect first video for this channel. So let's wind back the clock. My first novel was a 500-page, 180,000 word piece of shit called Mr. Fahrenheit. That's a story for another time, but please don't look it up. I was 17 years old and I handwrote the whole thing on refill and bound it together with metal rings. And never have I ever had such a profound and sustained burst of creativity, apart from the fact that I was a 17-year-old boy and I was really only thinking of one thing. And the fact that I was able to get it done using a pen, my hand, and a whole lot of paper, I marvel at past me. And I've been trying to emulate it ever since. Not the book, definitely not the book, but the productivity for sure. And then this came into my Instagram feed. A lot, like a whole lot. I was being bombarded with ads, which usually is kind of a red flag for me. And I don't buy a lot of stuff. But then, you know, I just bought it. The pitch is compelling in its simplicity, minimizing distractions. So what does it do? Well, not a whole lot. But that's entirely the point. You see, this looks like a tablet. It feels like paper, sort of, and it writes, well, I guess it writes somewhere between pencil and a ballpoint pen in terms of feel. It's got a few bells and whistles, like different pen styles. It's got highlighters and shaders, and even some colors that you can't see until later, if there is a later in your process. And it can even draw shapes. Shout out to the circle guy on Reddit, campaigning for shapes for the longest time. What a legend. But let's get down to business for writing. How is it for us writers? Let's start with the design, because the design is an important part. It's minimalistic. Really, I'd say, again, it is unremarkable. I don't really see it as something that brings attention to itself at all. It seems to be distraction-free in nearly every way. It just gets out of the way. But there are a couple of things I'd like to point out in its bare form that I like. The first is the asymmetrical design, which I wouldn't usually say. It leaves a lot of space on the left to hold on to, which probably isn't great for lefties, but it's fantastic for me. And it's also got a huge old chin on it, which is also like pretty good for gripping. And overall, it means that the screen has been pushed into the top right of the device itself, although it looks symmetrical without that part, because it's been balanced out by clever design. The little feet that stop it sliding around on the bottom are also a nice touch. But once it is in the case, it all tends to just disappear. And I think the case itself is actually sort of lacking in a bit of personality compared to the device itself, which isn't exactly an eye grabber. But as thin and as elegant as it is actually deceptively heavy. It comes in at around 400 grams. And the keyboard case, aka the Type Folio, it bumps up the total package to a bit over 800 grams. And I found as a result with these puny arms of mine that I can handle about half an hour of comfortable writing with it on the palm of my hand like this. And then a little bit longer while it's on my lap, and then basically as long as I can manually concentrate on a proper desk. But compared to one of the things that it's meant to replace, which is just paper, the Remarkable 2 is lighter and it has a lot more pages, especially compared to the way I wrote my first novel. Now let's talk about the thickness. Naturally, in 2025, it's barely more thick than the USB-C port that charges it. It's a very, very slender 4.7 millimeters, and it gets a bit thicker with the cover on, but a bit more than double to be honest, looking at it. But I don't find the thickness to be a precluding feature of most modern tech. In fact, I think things could stand to be a bit thicker in most devices, whether for increased battery life or for a more robust design. In saying that, I don't personally feel like the device feels all that fragile while in the type folio, but out of it, it feels absolutely naked in the vulnerable sense. Mine has spent all of one day out of the case, and it looks like it's basically in pristine condition. And mine was actually a slightly cheaper refurbished model. Now, we'll need to talk about the texture of the screen because I think that's important for writers. So, starting with the feel of it, does it feel like paper? No, it doesn't, at least not in the traditional sense. It doesn't have quite the same sound and coarse texture of paper. I suppose the feeling is a little bit like a soft lead mechanical pencil on a slightly too perfect bit of paper. And I suppose that is a nice feeling. I mean, way nicer than any shitty stylus on an iPad at least. But let's briefly talk about how much Remarkable talk this up in their marketing materials. Like, how much is this, feature really a selling point at all? You see, I think that nostalgia is a very potent marketing tool. It sort of forgoes design as a source of nostalgia. No skeuomorphism here, but feel. Now, feel is something special. It is something you simply have to try first, and the feedback of that feel is unique to your own experiences. Like for me, I was transported back to year 5 actually, Miss Rule's class. Shout out Miss Rule, writing an epic 10-page novel with double spacing in pencil. I was there in that classroom, second row, fourth desk back, scribbling away frantically, trying to get it done in the hour. I can hear it. I can supplant my memories of my first experience with that onto the Remarkable. Long story short, I basically sold it to myself. If you don't have that nostalgic feeling, then perhaps the sales pitch will be a little bit harder. That's where other features, or lack thereof, sort of start to flex. Like the screen size. It's not huge at 10.3 inches, but it is decently pixel dense, for lack of a better term, equating it to about 226 pixels per inch. And as a result, it is very easy on the eye, with text and annotations forming with decent crispness, I guess. Now, the pen. Sorry, I mean marker plus. It is horrendously expensive. For that, you get a nicely balanced sort of stylus pen, and it's a decent weight and thickness. And the nibs are made out of this sort of like dense cardboard material. And I think these, in conjunction with the frosted screen, it goes a long way to give that pencil on paper, not quite, feel. They do wear out depending on how you use them, but when I'm writing, they tend to sort of bend out. Once they get to that stage, I find they kind of lose accuracy. You have to swap them out. There's a little card that you use. I go through one every sort of 6 to 10 weeks. That's a very broad amount, but that's regular daily use. It's got a flat side. That's the part that actually latches on to the tablet with magnets. And interestingly, I noticed that with a few of my pens, my mind tricks my hands into feeling the difference between the different software pens in the options. Now, the keyboard cover. It's handy, but to be honest, for what we're doing, it's completely unnecessary, especially if you bought the tablet for handwriting. But it's generally a nice keyboard, clicky, stable keys, good amount of travel, although the click is pretty early on in the thing. It's like quite high in the action. I'd actually prefer it to be sitting at the bottom, if that makes sense. But the keyboard itself isn't particularly well integrated into the software experience. The formatting options as of 2025 are basically non-existent for anything other than just simple note-taking. Now, the battery life, obscenely long. It's e-ink, so I wouldn't expect anything less. But just bear in mind, the more page refreshes you do and navigating you do, you will churn through it. It is fast where it matters, but rather slow where it doesn't matter so much. Like, writing with this feels like low latency, but changing pages, it's pretty slow. Navigating menus, not exactly speedy. Switching between pens, that's pretty quick. They've optimized the interface with the limited resources that this device actually has, and they've basically given it the most performative feeling they can possibly give with the specs of the device. So with the hardware out of the way, let's get down to what we're all here for. What does this give to the writer? So far in the 2 years since I've had this device, I've used it in 3 distinct ways. The first was planning out the rest of my novel, which is now done. And up until I bought this, that was done entirely on Google Docs. Keen to organize my thoughts and bring threads of the storyline into a single plat, I was on the hunt for something that would help, in a way, help me out. And creepily, as Instagram ads tend to be, the remarkable popped up, as I said earlier, repetitively. I mean, I navigated myself to a different website to buy the device, basically to the website, because, you know, Instagram, fuck Zuck. And you know what? It worked. The book is done. Well, I mean, 120,000 words done, and I'm partway through the first edit. Woo. But unparalleled levels of focus is what this brought me, and not just because it was a new toy. This has been sustained productivity for me. Pages and pages of writing. It seems that without distractions being just a tap away, the erosion of my attention span isn't as permanent as I thought. The biggest hurdle though with this device is just taking a breath and actually picking up the device knowing that you're going to do work. Now it's the editing phase of the novel, which is basically just reading and copious amounts of annotations. I really do appreciate the ability to do this straight on to the PDF, while being able to zoom out and write more intensive notes, as well as switching between highlighters and pens without actually changing pens. With my first novel, it was never this easy, and to be honest, it shows. So I put this down to 3 key things. E-ink is too slow to be useful for anything other than reading or writing. Using essentially what is a pen on paper removes barriers of what I call formatting fatigue, essentially writing and formatting at the same time, and that sort of breaks your flow. Scrawling frantically without actually deleting keeps the flow going. And finally, all the sensory input of pen and paper reinforces the feeling of productivity. And I think the feeling and the sound of productivity is really important. Like the clack of a keyboard on a computer or a typewriter. Just distractions out of the way. The second use case was for simple note-taking. I went all out. My other channel is a cooking channel, and I used the Remarkable to write out shopping lists and actually used it to check off items while I was walking through the supermarket. I also used it to draft and edit recipes, and as a result I have pages and pages of food-related stuff. I also used it to design cooking equipment, so the ability to draw a straight line and just have it autocorrect shapes is just chef's kiss. Now for the third use case, I have to get something out of the way. This tablet isn't meant for intricate drawing, plain and simple. Even if you have the skills and can crank out the steps, there are stroke limits for the device that will freeze it up. Now, how did I figure this out? Well, the hard way. So I wrote a kid's book for my kids. The picture started off simple before increasing in complexity once I figured out the layer system and how you can sort of get around it. We can go into that a bit. Basically, I drew an intricate object that I wanted it to repeat and fade off into the distance. So I copied and pasted over and over again, selecting more and more versions of it each time to copy and paste until the memory it took to load up the image it was not up to the task. The tablet froze up, gave me an error message, and I had to reset the whole thing and delete parts of the image just to load up the file. Now, just for reference, this is the page. And these pods here were what broke it. I think it's down to the way the tablet renders the strokes as vectors. But either way, the next challenge was getting the images off the tablet, which was riddled with difficulties. For example, curved lines, rendering out with black bits between the start and the end point, shading and textures not showing up correctly, inputs that I thought I had erased still showing up. I tinkered with different export profiles, and eventually the easiest and the most detailed one was the PDF export option, and then creating a PNG from that later and tidying everything up in Photoshop. You see, the export options fail the actual operation of the tablet in nearly every way, as a sketch tablet at least. I suppose parts of this can be remedied in export protocols, but we'll see, I guess, in a future update. It's not really their focus in a way. Which brings me to the future of this device. Remarkable have been absolutely glacial in the release pace of these devices. The time between the first Remarkable and the second one, this one, was about 3 years. The Remarkable Paper Pro, which is I wouldn't actually call it a successor to this tablet, but instead a new Pro version, came out 4 years later, late 2024. In this day and age, that is remarkably slow. But the benefits are threefold. You see, the devices are consistently supported. I've received monthly updates, sometimes more, in the 2 years that I've had mine, with each iteration bringing exciting little feature additions that I really appreciate. But it also strips away that feeling of planned obsolescence. This thing hasn't slowed down at all. The third point, device longevity is good for your wallet and it's great for the planet, and I appreciate that. So the sister device, the Paper Pro, is out. I've not used it. I see no real benefit to color in my standard writing workflow, except for maybe illustrating the kids' picture book. But then again, coloring in a picture is just a workflow issue. I don't think that the Paper Pro makes the Remarkable obsolete by any means. And when it comes down to it, it's a different product. This is a different product to the Paper Pro. It's a branch on a tree of devices. And in fact, I would say that the Remarkable 2 is actually still a worthy purchase, though we are into the 5th year of the same product. So to be honest, it wouldn't surprise me if it gets updated with a faster and bigger screen. Personally, I'd say that there is the capacity to expand the screen size without actually expanding the footprint of the tablet. And a more powerful processor would be nice, and a bump in RAM to make sure you don't sort of run into issues. So yes, this productivity device from Norway is indeed remarkable in all the right ways. It's now a fairly permanent fixture in my workflow. As for the book, well, I'm in the middle of editing that at the moment. That's a whole other beast, and perhaps I'll make a video about editing your own manuscript without having to pay anybody, because most writers are struggling up until they're not. So for now, let me plug the book. It's called Birch. It's set in Latvia in 1989. Ronan travels to a Latvian forest and finds himself unable to leave. Cross your fingers I can get this thing over the line. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. There's more coming. We've got one that's already shot about a device. It's not a new device, but it is a helpful device.